Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We are just counting down 2 minutes to begin our session for parents this afternoon on preparing our children to thrive in a VUCA world. So just hang on for a couple of minutes and we'll begin at 2 p.m. sharp. Now, the notes for this particular session, which I'll be displaying throughout the session, will be available a bit later on. So after my session ends, I'm intending to, Google link this to my Google folder, so all of you can download all of the notes a bit later. All right. So we're just counting down. Just give me a few minutes. When the clock strikes 2, we can then begin our session for today. And thank you all for checking in and joining us for this afternoon session, virtual workshop on preparing our children to thrive in the VUCA world. All right, the time is 2 p.m., so we're going to make a start now. My name is Chee Leong, and I'm happy to join all of you today to run this parenting workshop on preparing our children to thrive in a VUCA world. And I want to welcome in particular our parents from all of our different schools and kindergarten. So a special shout out to parents from Real Kids, our 37 centers, all over Malaysia, our parents from Cambridge English for Life, our parents from Sri KDU schools and from Real schools, and of course, many of my colleagues from Sri KDU and Real Education who are also joining us, plus members of the public. So some of you may be friends and family, or just people who came across news of this session. So I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon to come and share some ideas on how do we parent and prepare our children for a VUCA environment. All right. So I'm just going to make a start. Now, like I mentioned a bit earlier, the notes that I'm going to be showing throughout this session, I will make available a bit later on, right? So please don't worry about copying anything down. I will make the PDF version and sort of put it under comments a bit later on, so that all of you from your various Facebook pages can sort of log on, all right? So good afternoon, everybody. Once again, this is Chee Leong here, and I'm going to be sharing about how to prepare your children for a VUCA world. So let's start first with what on earth is a VUCA world, right? So this is a term that, I've used a lot over the last 4 or 5 years. I learned the term from, my former boss and mentor, Dr. Paul Chan, who introduced this term to us. And I've been reading about the term that it originally actually started with military training. So it was something that began, in places like West Point and Sandhurst Academy when they were training military leaders to lead in a situation that is very, very fluid. So they term the context of VUCA context or VUCA situation, and VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I guess for people who were in military and are being prepared to lead in a battlefield environment, then VUCA makes complete sense. So volatility meaning it's a situation that is always changing, very, very, very dynamic. Uncertainty because you're not quite sure what will happen next. So a lot of shocks and surprises. Complexity, this refers to the fact that there are a lot of moving parts, many, many, many factors to consider when you're, in a battlefield environment. And ambiguity, this is important because, in such a complex context, it's not easy to define things like goals and objectives, defining what the challenge is, defining who the enemy is, defining what the priorities are. So that ambiguity, I guess is latent in a VUCA environment. So you put these four things together, you've got this really, difficult, challenging environment to navigate through. So that was originally a military term, but over the last 10, 15 years, this has become very much part of the vocabulary in, for example, business. So a lot of MBA programs, business training programs, all of these CEO, business leadership, business management programs incorporated the term VUCA, because I think even then they were realizing that the whole world is becoming a very much a VUCA world. Something happens in another part of the world, it has ripple effects. And because, I guess of increased connectedness and this globalization, all of us are connected to one another. It's led to a much more VUCA environment. A terrorist attack happens, in Europe, it affects Asia. A crisis, a virus breaks out, in Asia, it affects, the rest of the world as well. And so, a subprime crisis in the US affected all of our economies. And the fact that we are all interconnected means that we are no longer having to just monitor local factors. And so for people in business, in leadership, when they are thinking about their organizations, they're not just thinking about what's happening in my neighborhood, in my city, in my state, in my country, in my region even. They're having to monitor hundreds of these things all around the world because it's become a VUCA world, right? And I think that the situation we're in right now with COVID-19 is, I guess, a classic example and a case in point of this VUCA environment. How many of us, in December or January, would have predicted that we are going to be in the situation we're in now, here in the country, but also you look at the situation all over the world. Things happen incredibly quickly. It didn't take 7-8 months for the pandemic to break out. It took 1 or 2 months, and immediately all of our lives were changed. The way we worked, the way we lived, the way we were teaching, we were educated, everything, So I think the current COVID crisis certainly is a good illustration for the fact that we live in a VUCA world, whether we like it or not. But look, I think the idea of preparing our children for a VUCA environment, it's not just speaking to the current crisis, because as urgent and as large as the current crisis is, we all know that the COVID crisis will pass. Whether it's a matter of months or whether it's a matter of a year, we realize that, the world will move on. We will come out of this crisis. But I think, the rationale behind the topic for today is the fact that our children are going to be, inevitably growing up in a VUCA environment. And if it's not the COVID crisis, it's going to be other things. In fact, in the past, when I talked about the VUCA environment, usually we're not talking about things like viruses or political change or, economic upheaval. We are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, and really the thinking behind why we are going to be living in an increasingly VUCA environment compared to the environment we grew up in the 70s or 80s or 90s, is the fact that the fourth industrial revolution promises that the rate of change and the complexity of that change for life in general, but for work, for careers, for business, for education, those cycles of change are going to be speeding up a lot more. And so, the VUCA environment is really here to stay. So even once we get past the COVID-19 crisis, I think that the point of note is the fact that, the VUCA world still remains VUCA. So for example, I share these statistics, this was within a paper by the World Economic Forum on the future of work, all right, the future of jobs. And some of these figures are quite frightening. They talk about the fact that 65% of our children who are studying in school now, by the time they graduate, they're going to be working in jobs that don't exist today. And that's frightening, because then how do we do career guidance? If in a sense, 65% of the careers are going to be newly emerging careers, newly emerging industries and jobs, so that 65% figure just gives you a snapshot of what we mean by the fact that, our children are going to be growing up as young adults and as working adults in a VUCA environment. The stat next to that talks about the fact that the next generation will probably have to change on average, careers 3 times in their lifetime, which is incredible. I mean, we're not talking about companies, I mean, changing companies 3-4 times, that's normal even now. But we're talking about changing whole careers, whole industries, because the world of work is going to be a VUCA environment. And because of technology and quantum computing and AI, there are going to be so many professions that are going to be redundant, right? Everybody's been talking about this for the past 4 or 5 years. The 4IR world, the fourth industrial revolution world, means that, I mean, no job is safe, So again, I guess I wanted to start off by establishing the fact that, talking about VUCA is incredibly important, I think, for all of us who are parents. I'm a parent myself, I think all of us as parents, we share this, common dedication and common concern to ensure that, our children have a bright future, right? We want them to live full lives. We want them to live happy lives. We want them to be able to sustain themselves, more than survive. We want them to thrive. And so, in order to thrive and survive in their future, then we need to be thinking about how are we preparing them to develop, qualities and traits that are going to get them through this VUCA environment, because VUCA is here to stay. All right. So what I've done is I've sort of structured the session for today, which should take about an hour, into 10 things that I want to share, 10 ideas. And I've titled this 10 qualities we can teach our children during this, current MCO that we're experiencing here in Malaysia. All right, and and the idea that this 1 month, maybe the MCO may be extended beyond that, but this 1 month is really presenting an ideal opportunity to teach our children certain qualities. Now that we are sort of all trapped in our houses with our children, and these qualities are not just to help them get through the 1 month of the MCO, but what I'm arguing is that these are qualities that are going to really be useful for them in the long term, as we're preparing them for this VUCA environment. All right, so let's start with number 1. So the first quality that we can teach them now during the MCO that will help them in the VUCA world is adaptability. I think this is quite obvious. In a VUCA environment, the key trait is this fluidity, this agility, this ability to pivot, to be able to move, adapt, be flexible. Because I mean, if I'm going to be growing up and living in an ever-changing, world environment, whether it's my work environment, whether it's my, cultural, environment, my social environment, then I need to be the kind of person that is very quickly adapting to change. Somebody that is comfortable with change, somebody that is not going to feel threatened, by change. And look, this is difficult. I mean, as a psychologist, I can tell you one of the most common stress factors is actually change. I mean, people are threatened by change because, anything that presents the unknown, anything that presents something that I don't fully understand, I don't fully fathom, presents a threat to me. And this, levels of threat then translate into stress. And that's very normal. I mean, this is psychology 101. And so this is in a sense something that is a skill. It's a habit to master. How do I become more used to a changing environment, to the point where I am embracing the change, to the point where I've got a certain set of skills, but also mentally, psychologically, I'm prepared for change. And I no longer see change as being this huge threat to me, but I see change as something that is an opportunity for me to learn and to grow. All right. And so what I've suggested in my notes here as a very practical thing that parents can teach their children is, for example, problem solving. Problem solving is a good example of a skill that helps increase adaptability. So a lot of times, I mean, we can't adapt to different environments because we don't know how to solve problems, where we are, and we feel very helpless we feel very hopeless, we feel powerless, and that's when the stress levels really rise, and the frustration and the anger levels grow. So something, I'm sure your children are going to encounter this 1 month, being locked down at home. There are going to be certain things they experience, so for example, a lot of schools now, we are using online learning, methods. We use Zoom, we use Google Hangouts, and there are going to be times where I'm sure the Wi-Fi and the broadband in your house is going to be stretched, and you're going to have kids at home where they're doing some sort of a Google Hangout session with their school, and then halfway through the screen freezes, broadband is not fast enough, that there are blips, they go off and on, and of course, many young children, they get very frustrated, they get angry, they panic, they freak out, what am I supposed to do? They throw tantrums. And so I think this is an opportunity as parents to say, look, it's not about throwing tantrums or shouting and screaming is not going to solve the problem. So let's calm down, all right? And then 3 simple steps. Number 1, what is the problem, right? So learning to define what is the problem. Is the problem in the computer? Is it technical? Is it the broadband? Is it Wi-Fi? Okay, so let's first try to understand the situation and understand what is the problem here. So the problem is I can't log into my e-lesson because there's something wrong with the broadband. And then step 2, we talk about, okay, what are the options you have? All right. So the focus then becomes, what are things you can do to solve this problem, right? So could we, maybe turn the computer off and on again? Maybe it's a modem issue. Could we use hotspots? Are there alternative sources for the Wi-Fi? Is it that too many people in the house are using the Wi-Fi at the same time? So maybe one solution is, could we maybe talk to your brothers and your sisters and your father and your mother, ask them for the next half an hour, could they all take a break from Netflix or whatever it is they're downloading on their computer, so that you can use the computer. So identify options, and the key there is focusing on the fact that you are not powerless. And then step 3, picking the best option and doing it. And look, so whether it's I'm hungry, whether it's there's a Wi-Fi issue, whether it's raining and I can't watch Astro, your children are going to be encountering different issues and different problems during this MCO. And I would say, as parents, rather than solving it for them, right? So the worst thing you can do is just do everything for them. It's better you take on the role of a coach and talk them through the problem-solving process. So step 1, defining. Step 2, identifying options. Step 3, then making a decision and asking yourself, so let's try different things, and see what works to solve that particular problem, and be patient with that. So a very constructive approach to adapting to a changing environment or an emerging problem, right? So this is something that parents should do. And of course, it takes patience on the part of the parents, because, it may be faster just to solve the problem yourself. But the thing then is that you're not really teaching your children anything. So if the goal is to teach and help equip your children with new skills for this VUCA world, then it may need you to set aside and invest a few more minutes to take your child through a process like that, right? So number 1, adaptability as manifest in problem-solving skills. And number 2, we talk about developing a strong internal locus of control, right? So now that's very psychology speak. So let me break it down into, it's about focusing on what is under my control. 2 days ago, I gave another session on stress management for staff. And this was a similar point I made, which is that when you're managing stress in a VUCA uncertain environment, the key is always to, not spend so much time thinking and worrying about things that are beyond your control. The key is really to very quickly establish what is within your control and focus on that, Because look, in this life, my friends, I think you and I have been alive long enough to realize that there are many situations where a lot of factors are not within our control. So, let's take the MCO situation right now. The fact that there's a pandemic in the world is not under our control. That's not something that we started. That's not something that, personally, myself, I can, do a lot about. The fact that, therefore, the government decided on an MCO, that's not under my control. So the government, they were in authority, they made that decision. And therefore, I need to comply, with the MCO. The fact, therefore, that, many of our businesses are affected by it. the fact that there's going to be probably an economic recession that comes about because of the COVID crisis worldwide. I mean, a lot of these big things, macro things, are not within our control. And I think as human beings, the key, therefore, is to focus on, so how do I respond in this situation? What can I do, to survive, to thrive, to adapt, to pivot? What strategies can I then put in place to then succeed in this environment? Because I may not be able to change a lot about my environment, but there are certain things that I can change and I can focus on. I mean, I've got that screenshot of that book that, I think a lot of us read, was introduced through business management and a lot of these management programs. And it was the hot book, I think, 20, 30 years ago. I remember, reading this. And I like it. I mean, it's sort of a fable. I mean, it's the kind of book that you can probably read in 5 minutes. And just to give you a bit of a summary, all right? So spoiler alert coming up. I mean, the whole story is about, I mean, it's this, fable, fantasy situation where, these human beings and rats live in this maze, right? And every day, for whatever reason, the people that are running this maze, or the beings that are running this maze, they leave food in the form of cheese, all right? So they leave the cheese in a certain part of the maze at a certain time. And this is sort of like clockwork. So every day at the same place, the human beings and the rats all go to the same part of the maze, and they get their cheese and they eat it and they're satisfied. And this sort of goes on day after day, day after day. And one day the story begins by, they're all gathered there at sort of the given time, but something happens because there's no cheese. All right. And the whole story sort of tracks the reaction between the rats and the human beings, right? So the human beings, they stay there and they sort of have this huge, philosophical existential debate about, it's not fair, why aren't these people giving us our cheese? And so really it's sitting there and moaning and groaning about the whole situation. And in the meantime, of course, the rats, having spotted the fact that the cheese is not there, they rush off and, they start looking in other parts of the maze. And within a few minutes, they find that the cheese is somewhere else in the maze and they're happily eating. All the while, the human beings are still sitting in that same original spot, complaining, debating, arguing, moaning and groaning, about who moved my cheese, what happened to the cheese. And I guess, this really illustrates the idea of, I mean, in a VUCA environment, there are going to be a lot of times when people move your cheese, and you could sit there and have long debates about what is fair and not fair and what is good and bad and what should be and shouldn't be. But in a sense, the people that are going to thrive in a VUCA environment, quickly they move on. They focus on, therefore, what can I do in this situation in order to get the cheese? So whether it's looking somewhere else or doing this or doing that or doing this, it's a very action-oriented approach to, I guess, the situation. And it's about defining in any given context, therefore, what is under my control. Now, I've been teaching this principle for a long time, this idea of locus of control for many, many, many years. And even in coaching sessions, one-to-one, whenever anybody has thought, no, Chee Leong, you're wrong, there is a situation where we have no control over any factor. When we have processed every situation, every problem situation, every challenging situation, I can guarantee you that there are always a few things that are within our control. There's always something we can do to respond and react. It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to say it's easy or necessarily pleasant, but there are always things we can do, in any given situation. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, right? So encouraging our children to have this internal locus of control. So when they are in a situation in this MCO where, they're so frustrated because they can't do this, they can't do that, it's about then drawing their attention to, hey, look, my son, my daughter, what can you do in this situation? What is under your control? And making those salient and conscious to them. And of course, look, we also realize that this fear of control, this locus of control, is going to become bigger and bigger. As we grow older and as we become more experienced and as our expertise grows, with greater innovative thinking, more resourcefulness on our part, we realized that actually our sphere of control was larger than we thought to begin with, and I guess that's where we talk about intelligence and leadership and resourcefulness, that when we start to think outside the box, we start to realize, I'm not as helpless as I was. All right, so that's my number two thing. The second quality to really develop in our children, having this strong internal locus of control, that in any situation, these are some things that I can do. These are constructive things that I can do, so that I never feel completely helpless, right? Okay, number three. And by the way, this prayer of serenity that I think a lot of us are acquainted with just illustrates the point that I've been making, which is it's about discerning, right? What are the things I can change? What are the things I can't change? And having the wisdom to sort of, discern between the two, so that I don't keep knocking my head and get very frustrated, dwelling on a lot of things that are not within my control, and that's not constructive or, mentally healthy. All right, third tip. So this is the third quality that as parents we should help develop in our children so that they thrive in a VUCA environment. And the third thing is independence. I think, look, all parents want this. The nightmare of any parent. I've spent a lot of time, with parents over the last, 25 years as a psychologist, working in education, and I think, look, this is the one fear for parents, isn't it? That your child, becomes 18 or 19 or 21 or whatever it is, and they're supposed to be ready for the real world, but they're not. And as parents, I think that's our nightmare, that you've got this, human child that is actually an adult, but still a child, because, they can't look after their finances. They have no idea how to manage money. They don't know how to look after their physical and mental health. They're not able to make adult decisions. They're always swayed, easily swayed by other people. They're not independent thinkers. They don't know how to, weigh up options and make responsible decisions. They don't look after their personal health and safety. So that's the irony, isn't it? That the risk is, if we are focusing as parents too much on just the academics, which is important. I'm in education, so I know studies are important, but that's the trap, isn't it? That we focus so much on helping our kids get straight A's, that you've got this 10A student that you don't even trust to sort of, go to town to buy something and come home. You don't trust to pay electricity bills. You don't trust to do their budgeting. You don't trust to travel alone at night because, you're worried that they don't have the independent survival skills to survive in the real world. So I think it's really about coupling, the book smarts with the street smarts, isn't it? So that they are able to function as adults and not have us, looking over the shoulder all the time. Surely, when they're in university, you can't be in a situation where as parents, we're still waking them up and reminding them to do homework and to wash their clothes and to, take baths and wash their hair. And that's ridiculous, So I think the idea here is that we want to, have that long-term picture. And in parenting workshops, I've always talked about that, right? Parenting needs to be long-term. You can never be short-term in your thinking when you're parenting. So you may be taking short-term action with your child and the way you interact with your child, the way you discipline your child. But when you're making those decisions, you always need to have a long-term orientation. And the long-term orientation is that we are developing children to be independent in the long term, right? And therefore, part of it, during this MCO lockup, I would say, start with getting kids to be more responsible for themselves. Hopefully, the maid is not there in the house anymore. So, the kids will need to learn how to clean up after themselves, do the dishes, mop the floor, tidy up their room, wash their own clothes, learn how to use the washing machine, learn how to hang up the clothes, learn how to, dry the clothes, learn how to fold it, put it away, manage their own studies. I think now that a lot of schools are doing online learning, this is a really good time to get your children to be responsible for their own studies, rather than the parents having to, nag them every hour of every day to do your homework, remember this, remember that, remember you've got a Zoom session with your teacher. It's about, I think from the age of 10, 11, 12, I mean, the kid should really start taking more responsibility. And of course, gradually, you're giving them more and more responsibility and space to take ownership of their lives, So by the time that they're 13 or 14, I would say, I mean, the children should be completely managing their own studies. So things like their study schedule, their homework schedule, making sure that they're preparing for exams. I mean, by 13, 14, the parent's role is really like an external consultant. I'm just here to coach. If you need help, ask me. I'm happy to help, give you support, give you advice. I'm not going to be reminding you every day, sort of wake up and do work, And as parents, you need to understand, I mean, this is a basic psychological principle, Human beings don't usually do things until they have to, right? So some of you who are complaining about the fact that, but Dr. Goh, my teenager is not like this, they are super irresponsible, they can't be trusted to do anything, and my point is that chances are they are not doing anything for themselves, because right now you're playing the role for them, you see. So they don't need to do it for themselves. They don't need to wake up themselves, because they know that you're going to wake them up every morning. They don't need to manage their own studies, because they know that mom and dad, papa and mommy are going to be reminding them of their homework, and so I think this is sort of a vicious cycle. So MCO period, this is a really good time to break the cycle, to say, hey, look, you're cleaning up after yourself. If you don't clean up, then, then your room is messy. You don't learn to cook for yourself, then you don't eat, you don't wash your clothes, then you have nothing to wear, in 3-4 days. So I think teaching them the natural consequences of not taking responsibility now is a really good time to do that, right? And like I say, children will learn. That's why, I mean, when you look back at our own lives, I mean, many of us grew up. I mean, we really grew up and became adults, when we had to, when there was nobody around to help us manage money and our health and our time. And then we realized that we had to step up, and so I know it's difficult in a lockdown when everybody is in the house. But as parents, then it's about setting boundaries and parameters and saying, hey, look, these are responsibilities. Everybody in the family is going to do some work. And, this is about time that everybody starts growing up. But I want to make one more point that is not in the slides, which is the other element about independence is about making decisions, right? So we say we want our children to be able to make adult decisions when they're adults. So by the time they're 19 and 20 and 21, we don't want them to be, still stunted and still relying on everybody else to make decisions for them. We want them to be independent. Now, to do this, though, they need practice. So the only way to learn how to make decisions is through practice. So I think my comment here is that, I mean, start young. I mean, so if your 7-8-year-old is not even given, the decision-making space to decide on what toothpaste to buy or what t-shirt to wear, or, your 10-year-old is not given the freedom to choose who to make friends with. I mean, how do you expect your 21-year-old to decide on a future career or university, or your 22, 23-year-old son and daughter to decide on a life partner for marriage, So I think it's unrealistic for us to believe that if we don't give our children opportunities to make decisions, when they are younger, and I'm not saying, they're given total freedom to decide on everything. Of course not. So as parents, we're using our discernment on what is appropriate for each group level. And the older they get, of course, the sphere of their decision-making, the responsibilities we're giving them becomes bigger and bigger, right? But I mean, it needs to be a gradual build-up. You can't expect, like I say, your 19-year-old to wake up one day and suddenly, magically, by some miracle, have all of the decision-making ability when they've never been trusted to make any decision for the last 18 years, right? So that's not going to happen. And so this needs to be a progressive cycle. I mean, for those of you who are in leadership and management, you will know that the same principle applies for your leadership pipeline, your talent pipeline, Why do some companies have leadership gaps where when the CEO, when the senior leaders retire, there's no replacement? Well, that's because you've never trusted anybody in your downline to make any decision. And all of the decisions in the company is made by one person, and that's great for the one person, But my point is that the problem is when that one person retires or moves on, the problem is there's a huge gap because nobody else has any decision-making experience. So I think just like the leadership pipeline in a company, where we say at different levels, people are given space and responsibility to make certain decisions, right? So you start off making $100 decision, and then a $10,000 decision, and a $50,000 decision, and a $1 million decision. Before one day, you're probably going to be making $100 million decisions, and slowly you're building up, right, these skill level of how to make decisions, and that's probably a lot more, that's a more realistic, growth and development process and cycle. So same thing for our kids. Okay, back to our children. Number 4, the fourth quality and skill that I think we should teach our children that will help them survive and thrive in a VUCA world is intellectual curiosity. Those of you who have listened to my parenthood workshops in the past will know that this is one of my favorite words in the world, right? This is one of my favorite words in the world because to me, this is really the root of all learning and knowledge and wisdom. I mean, in school, we're trying to get kids to remember this curiosity that they have. So intellectual curiosity, by the way, is a natural thing that all human beings are born with, right? So, I mean, any psychologist can tell you that when a child is first born, the first few years of life in particular, the brain is really designed to be this information gathering supercomputer. Everything about the brain, the first few days of life, all the way through to when they are children. I mean, the whole brain is designed to master the environment, to understand, to notice, behave, observe, everything, understand, touch, explore. That's why, I mean, you put your 1-year-old kid, 7-month-old kid, on the floor, they start crawling around, they start touching things, putting things in their mouth. All of these are manifestations of this explore mode, right? This natural curiosity that the brain has to soak up as much information about the world, because this is survival. This is evolutionary psychology. This is the idea that to survive in the environment, the human being or the animal needs to understand the environment. And the more they understand, the more they're going to survive, right? This is contextual intelligence as well. So the first thing to understand is that this curiosity is not something that we need to put into our kids' head. They are born with it. So when you remember back to when your child was 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, maybe even now, 5 years old, 6 years old, I mean, there are unending series of questions they're asking you, right? From the back of the car when you're driving, Papa, why is the moon round? Why does the moon change shape on different times of the year? Why is the sun, bright red? 101 things. How does electricity work? How does petrol work? Animals, dinosaurs, everything they see, they've got this natural urge to understand. And that manifests itself by lots of questions. And of course, parents sometimes are driven up the wall. I mean, you're driven crazy because half of those things you have no answer. I mean, how am I supposed to understand, why the sun changes color when it sets and stuff like that? I'm not a scientist, But the idea here is that if we don't honor that intellectual curiosity, very quickly it can be killed off. And we can see a lot of children, I mean, by the time they're 10, 11, 12, 13, something has happened, all right? Because at that age, learning has become a bad word, unfortunately, to many children, many students. They don't want to learn, Learning to them is something negative, something scary, something stressful. So something bad has happened. I think our role as parents is to protect that intellectual curiosity, to keep it safe, to encourage it. And so whenever your children ask you questions, answer it, take it seriously, no matter how dumb or stupid you think the question is or trivial it is. If you don't have the answer, go find out, Wikipedia, go on the internet, get answers, read, research it together, but treat this curiosity with respect, something precious, something to be protected, all right? And so I think that's part one, this hunger for knowledge and information. Certainly in our schools, as teachers, this to me is our key role. Our key role is really to protect, encourage, and inspire this intellectual curiosity, this love for learning. That if we are not doing that, then we are not doing our jobs as schools or teachers or preschools. So to me, this is the key philosophy. So for colleagues out there from Sri KDU and Real and CFL, let's take heed of this. All right, our goal, our philosophy of education should be, how do we protect and encourage intellectual curiosity? Because this is a key trait in a VUCA environment. I mean, in a VUCA world where everything is spinning out of control, and there's so much complexity and so much data, to higher civilization that have this curiosity, that are always asking questions. Why are we doing this? Why can't we do things better? Why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? Always inquisitive, asking, in a sense, the right question, exploring, always learning. Without the boss having to force them to learn, force them to read. They realize that this asking questions and finding answers are going to help them do their job better, and help the organization do better. So I can tell you, as a CEO, I mean, that's one of the number one traits I'm looking for in the staff that I'm hiring, whether leadership, senior, or whether junior. I want somebody with intellectual curiosity, because then I know this person is going to be a huge asset to me when my organization goes through a VUCA environment where out things very quickly. I think part 2 of this slide, I wanted to share a bit about higher order thinking skills. This idea that in a VUCA environment, children, soon to be adults, need to be good at joining the dots, so we say, right? Connecting the dots. Because I mean, in this internet age, there's no shortage of data and information. In this age of big data analytics, I mean, the data is all over the place. And in most cases, freely available. I mean, you go on the internet, you can get information on almost anything. And so the challenge is, what do I do with all this information and data and intelligence? All this information and facts, I mean, am I able to be smart in sieving through what is relevant, asking the right questions, what is valuable to me, what is important, what is not important, what is reliable data, unreliable data, how do I analyze, evaluate, so all of those things you see in that pyramid on the right-hand side of that diagram, there's something called Bloom's taxonomy. Parents, this is something that all teachers know. This is first week of teacher training college. This is something we all learn in education. So for parents, if you want to be able to track and understand what we mean by higher order thinking skills, go back and do some homework reading today about Bloom's taxonomy. But all of that stuff on the top now, creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, all of that becomes incredibly important in a world where there's lots of information, right? And my next slide, I just wanted to illustrate this a little bit more. I've talked a little bit about this in some of my previous sessions. The idea that in education, we are having what I call a C2C education shift from the cup. And in the past, before the internet, before, information was so easily accessible, the focus was really on memory. Because, the analogy we used was that the child's mind is an empty cup. They come to school or university, and my job as an educator is to fill that cup with a lot of knowledge, right? And nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think in the 70s and 80s, all that made sense, because information is important, and I'm not saying information is, but I'm just saying that there's been a shift in that focus. Because, I mean, before the internet, there was really a need to be able to store lots and lots of things, right? Rather than necessarily evaluating or understanding what it was. And so a lot of our examinations, for example, used to be very memory focused. It's memorizing lots of stuff, and the person who can memorize this the most basically wins, But I think in today's world, in this VUCA world, the 21st century, in an age where information is so freely available, the internet and the phone is almost an extension of your brain, The challenge now needs to shift up to teaching our children how to navigate. So that's why I say, from the compass, from the cup illustration, we are really shifting to a compass. The role in our children's brains to becoming a compass. Now, I'm not saying memory, knowledge is important, more stuff. I'm not saying ignorance is bliss, I'm saying universities should teach information and knowledge and an appreciation of that. But I think we need to go beyond that all right, to say we don't just stop at getting kids to memorize lots of information, but we are honing the kids' mind to becoming a compass so that they can not lose their way. They're able to find their bearings in the sea of data, the ocean of endless data and intelligence that they will find, online. All right. So going back to the end here, so this intellectual curiosity about this love for knowledge and learning, but also having the higher order thinking skills to think for themselves. So my tip for parents here is that's what kids, I mean, when your schools set homework for your child that forces the child to think through, to have daily, debate and argue knowledge in their head, read something and analyze it and form their own opinions. Don't do it for them. It's important to allow the child to struggle. Struggling is part of the education process. So I think both teachers and parents, this is my advice for you. You want them to develop their minds, then you can't feed them baby food all the time. They need to learn to eat solid food, and solid food they need to mean their system needs to learn how to break down things that are more difficult, more complex, right? Move on, number 5, the 5th skill that we should be teaching our children so that they thrive in a VUCA environment is resilience. So this is about strength. This is about, the child's ability to deal with setbacks, disappointments, having that emotional strength to be able to, and life hits them, knocks them back. And again, I think as adults, we all realize that life is not going to be easy. A VUCA environment means that life is not a series of unending victory after victory after victory. It's not a chain of good days and good days and good days, and everything will be sunny and rosy and everything will come out the way we want it to. And life is not like that. We are not doing our children any favors when we are being overprotective, right? So that's my tip for parents. You want to build resilience, you need to learn to take away that force field once in a while and use your discernment so that you're gradually exposing your children to the realities of the real world, things like disappointments and stress and pressure and setbacks. Now I want to make clear here, I'm not asking anybody to sort of purposely go make life a misery for your children. That's not my point. So please don't take away that message. You don't need to be cruel to your children. You shouldn't. You don't need to create extra challenges for them. In their environment as they are, in school, at home, with their friends, in their education settings, they will have more than enough challenges and setbacks and disappointment experience in the normal course of a day, a week, and a month. And so it's not so much about parents having to create more, hardship. They will experience hardship. I think it's about, as parents, when the hardship comes and the disappointments come, we need to be careful about the role we are playing. As a parent, our role is not to take away, the disappointment. Our role is not to then solve all of the children's problems so that they never have setbacks, they never have difficulties. They get everything they want, whenever they want, whenever they want. I mean, that's ridiculous, So we don't want to spoil our children, right? I mean, and I think for particularly the middle income, upper middle income group, this is a risk, I mean, being in education for the past 25 years, I've seen, my fair share of, I think, kids that are spoiled brats, for lack of a better word, because they've been protected their whole life. There's this strong sense of entitlement, they feel that the whole world owes them everything. And that's really bad, because at the first sign of hardship, so whether they hit university and, they can't cope with the stress there, or worse, when they start working the working world, when they enter the working world and they start, actually being exposed to real hard knocks, they can't cope with it, And you see that cycle, of young adults where, they start a job at the first sign of any barrier, any obstacle, any resistance, any conflict, then they move on. They can't take it. Then they go to the next company and the same thing. And then they move on and they realize them a lifetime to realize that the whole world is hard. There is no company in the world. There is no industry in the world. There's no career in the world where you have no challenges, where you have no setbacks, where you have no bad days, when you go to work. So I think we are not doing our children any favors by, in a sense, raising them in a bubble where everything is like a cartoon or a fairy tale and everything works out in the end, So I think we need to be careful about that. So as parents, it's about us sometimes taking a step back and allowing our children to be exposed to, I think, appropriate age, appropriate pressures, setbacks, challenges, problems. And I say that not to say that you don't help them, So for example, I mean, your child, who is going through a difficult time in school because maybe, they're struggling with a certain subject area. As a parent, I'm not saying you don't support them, you don't hold them, you don't, give them guidance, you don't advise them, you don't coach them on how they can become better, you don't give them tips. Of course not, You're there, you love them, you're there to support them. But I mean, it doesn't mean that you ask them to take a different subject. It doesn't mean that you go to the teacher and, shout at the teacher and say that the subject is too difficult for my child. It's not as though you should tell your child, therefore, you don't need to do any homework, you don't need to sit for any exams. I mean, so again, it's about supporting your child so that they learn to deal with the challenges and the setbacks themselves. But it's not about taking away those setbacks and challenges or removing them so that your child never has any resistance in their life. So I think that's a subtle but an important difference, right? So number 5, fifth thing to teach children in a VUCA environment is resilience. And part of that, to me, is about taking a healthy perspective in life, right? So, I in my workshops, I ask my participants what they think this means. For some of you who know about the history of South Africa, you will realize that this constitutes the number of years that Nelson Mandela was in prison, 27 years. Now, many of us are already complaining, being confined in our houses for 4 weeks. And in that sense, that's not even a prison. I mean, we can still come and go. We can still go buy groceries. We can take walks in our garden. We can be with our loved ones. So, I mean, in no way is this MCO comparable in any way to being in Nelson Mandela cell, which looks like this. In Robben Island, I had a chance to visit it, when we were attending a psychology conference in Cape Town many years ago. But in no way is it similar. But I mean, I use often this analogy for perspective. I mean, it's ironic because, I mean, he was in prison. And of course, I mean, he in no way, shape or form desired to be, choice to be in prison. It was a terrible hardship for him, incredible, difficult. But when you think about the attitude that people like Mandela and other leaders had when they were politically incarcerated for many, many years in prison, and how constructive they were in using the time to develop themselves, to think. I mean, Mandela got his university degree while he was in prison. He's developed his network, developed thoughts about the country, about the leadership and the direction that the country needed to go. And so my point is that that's the irony. So when we talk about taking perspective, he was in prison, but he made full use of the time. Many of us are actually we are not prisoners. We are actually free to do a lot of things. But many of us, we behave like prisoners, right? We have a prisoner mindset. We are always complaining about all the things we can't do. I can't do this, I can't do that, without, I think, looking within and seeing our context in its proper perspective. So I often use Mandela to say, look, all of us guys, I mean, as staff, as students, as leaders, we need to get a handle on a proper perspective. We need to stop moaning and groaning all the time, and feeling entitled all the time about, the fact that life owes you everything. And we need to start realizing that, within each challenge and each situation, there are opportunities for us to learn and grow. And the fact that people like Mandela, I mean, these were extreme circumstances, even in the most difficult hardships, were still able to grow and become stronger as people. Teaches that by taking the right perspective, we can as well. This quote, this was a quote by Helen Keller that I learned early on, I think when I was in school, and it's one of my favorite quotes in the whole world. I've kept it with me. as a companion through my schooling, my university, now my career, and my life as an adult. Helen Keller, of course, as you knew, I mean, she became both deaf as well as blind, but grew into such an established lady, accomplished so many wonderful things in her life. And so this quote that life is a daring adventure or nothing at all, I think this is about perspective taking. So teaching our children to see that, hey, look, there's so many things that they should be grateful for. There's so many opportunities that they have as young people growing up in a VUCA environment that may be scary, may be challenging. Of course, there are hardships, there will be setbacks, there will be despair. That all of us and our children, of course, will go through, periods where, we really have grave challenges. And I'm not underplaying the challenges that some of our families and some of our children will have to go through. I'm not making it smaller. I'm not making light of their challenges. But I'm saying when people like Mandela and Helen Keller, I mean, through their immense challenges in life, still retain this healthy perspective of life. I think that that's a really good lesson for all of us parents. And this is something we can model for our children as well. So I think through our COVID crisis, this 4 weeks, we as parents should model good behavior. So we shouldn't be moaning and groaning about all kinds of things that we can't do because of the MCO. We need to be showing our children that we have a healthy, positive perspective of life. All right. Now, moving along, number 6, developing emotional intelligence. So this is the 6th quality that will help our children thrive in a VUCA environment. So emotional intelligence is really important. And really, there are 3 basic skills to learn. So I just want to make this quite simple so that all parents, this is something that we can all share and teach our children. And we can do it during this MCO. So step 1 would be identifying the emotion. So asking the question, how do you feel? How do I feel? So how do I feel right now? I'm feeling, a bit agitated. I feel a bit uncomfortable. So I need to maybe, trace that feeling and reflect a little while on what am I really feeling? Is it angry? Is it stress? Is it worry? Is it I'm feeling tired, frustrated, disappointed? So it's about tracing, what is the emotion I'm feeling? So whether it's happiness or sadness or excitement or angst, worry, regret, as the child grows up, of course, their spectrum and their vocabulary grows. But this is something that we can do. So, I mean, when your child is throwing a tantrum or, obviously very unhappy about something, first thing to ask them is, okay, look, calm down. Let's calm down. First thing is, okay, tell me, how are you feeling? Okay, what's in your heart, right? So explain to Papa and Mommy, all right, how are you feeling right now? And then helping them through that process. So they say, okay, I'm feeling very, very angry. Okay, then the next question is understanding the emotion, right? So the next question is, so why do you feel angry? Right? So let's think, take time, don't rush, take time to reflect. What is the source of my anger? So of course, for a young child, that can be put in plainer words, right? So tell Papa and Mommy, why are you angry? Okay. And so they are thinking, okay, so I'm angry because, all right, I was on Zoom and the internet connection got broken off. So I halfway through a class with my friends, I got cut off. I got angry because I was watching Premier League football on Astro and it started raining and halfway through I couldn't see the match anymore. So okay, so at least step 2, you understand why you're angry. And that's really important. I mean, these are things even adults, by the way, fail to do a lot of times, because many times we feel a lot of emotions, but because we're not taking time to actually reflect on these emotions, we really have no idea why we're feeling a certain way. So something has happened, for example, in the office, and we're angry. We're angry at our boss. We're angry at our staff. We're angry at the customer. So something has happened in the office to aggravate your irritation or anger. You come home, all right, but you're not reflecting on step 2. And so something happens at home and therefore you end up screaming at your children or your husband or wife or, screaming at the TV or the pet dog or cat or something like that. And we call that misdirected anger, right? Because actually you've not been monitoring who are you actually angry with. And you're not angry at your family, actually. You've brought back that anger. But because you're not asking yourself, question number 2, why do I feel this anger? unfortunately, we vent our anger at the wrong target. All right. So number two, really important, even for adults. All right. So understanding the emotion. So get your child into the habit of asking that question. So why do you feel happy? Why do you feel angry? Why do you feel stressed? Why do you feel worried? Okay, so let's spend a few minutes talking about, just think about, why are you so stressed? What is causing the stress? Let's try to get at the bottom of it. And then number three, of course, is managing the emotion. And that really depends on what is the source of the stress or the anger, So again, going back to the problem solving skills that I shared earlier in the workshop, maybe it's about problem solving so that you solve a problem and that changes the emotional state. Or it also could be about channeling and expressing the emotion in a proper way. So we say to our children, it's okay to feel angry, So look, nothing wrong in this house to feel angry because the internet or the broadband has failed and therefore you're not able to, do whatever it is you want to do. It's okay, perfectly natural. Papa also gets angry all the time, but it's important that you know how to express your anger in a healthy way, right? So we say, look, throwing a tantrum, throwing things around, breaking the computer, screaming at people, that's not an appropriate response for anger. So this is where then the parent becomes the coach to say, so let's talk about what is a positive way to express anger. So it's okay. You can, so for example, you can talk to somebody, you can come and talk to papa and mommy and vent a little bit and, talk and express how you're feeling. And as long as you're not shouting at us, but expressing the emotion, that may be an outlet. You can do something creative. You can do some exercise around the house. You can, there are various things, isn't it? Even as adults, we do to sort of, channel our anger, our emotion, our stress in ways that are not destructive, right? So I think the parent's role in this regard is to take the role of a coach. So when we talk about EQ, it's about guiding your child through these 3 steps and doing it over and over and over and over again, every day until it becomes more of a habit for the child. And after a while, you realize that the child will be able to go through these 3 steps by themselves. But your role is to coach them. How? How do you identify the emotion? How do you understand your emotions? How do you manage your emotions? Your role is not to shout at them to make it even worse, all right? So the child that is stressed or angry, or the 3-4-year-old that is afraid of the dark, because they are having nightmares or fears. As parents, it's not useful to just shout at the child and say, hey, stop being afraid. Why are you afraid? Go upstairs. That's not productive in any way. That's not constructive feedback. Ordering the child not to be afraid, or ordering the child not to be stressed, or ordering the child not to be angry, that's not realistic or constructive. So it's about helping your child. How do you manage your fear? How do you overcome your fear? That's really the key, all right, as parents. So that's number 6, developing their EQ. And this is really going to be important in a VUCA environment because, of course, they're going to be exposed to a lot of extreme difficulties, which will lead to emotions like stress and anger, and they will need to learn how to cope with it in a constructive way. Number 7, we talk about collaborative skills. Our children need to learn how to work together with other people. So that's really important, learning how to communicate. That's why in school, so many of our activities are about group activities now, right? It's about getting kids to work with other people in the class, getting them to communicate in a confident way, getting them to write things, So that's why we're so proud of, for example, in our Real Kids kindergartens. They are doing a fantastic job at such a young age. 4, 5-year-olds, I go and visit their centers. These kids are all super confident, able to all express themselves in a very, in a very confident, assertive way. And I think that's wonderful, right? So communication skills is part of that. But also, I think it's about recognizing the needs of others. It's about developing empathy. And so during this MCO situation, really good opportunity to teach that because the whole family is sort of trapped in the house. And again, for, a child who may be a little bit selfish, a bit self-centered, this is a good opportunity then to teach them to look at the needs of other people, that in different situations, the parents reminding them to say, look, in this situation, don't just think of yourself, right? You need to look and consider the needs of others in the family during the MCO period. their physical needs, so don't make so much noise because they need rest. Your papa and mommy have worked very long for the whole day, and so have you. So everybody needs a little bit of peace at night to rest. So whether it's a physical need, whether it's a psychological need, people need to be encouraged, people need to be hugged, people need to be affirmed, praised, told that you love them, social needs, so all of these I think are good practices. Getting children to think and stop and consider in a situation. Hey, look, stop and think, what are the needs of these people? In this situation, put yourself in the shoes of this person, this friend of yours, this teacher of yours, this relative of yours, this family member of yours, this neighbor of yours, and in this situation, how do you think they will feel? What are the challenges, or what are the difficulties or problems do you think they're experiencing? How can you help these people? How can you be a support to these people? So I think thinking in that way, creating this habit of being empathetic in their thinking, I mean, that's going to make a big difference. Again, I come back to the time when they're going to be adults, I mean, nobody wants to hire a staff that is self-centered and selfish. No team, no department, no organization in the world wants to bring people that only look for themselves, look after themselves, right? That are terrible at working with others, that tear down other people, that are bring out the worst in everybody else, always in conflict with everybody else. They can't get along with anyone. I mean, which organization wants somebody like that? So again, when we're talking about our children, it's about how do we help them develop that appreciation that you can't do things by yourself. It's okay to be an individual, that's all right, but you need to learn to connect with others. I mean, the old-fashioned term is you just need to learn how to get along, and learn the social skills to be able to get along with others so that you make other people feel comfortable with you. You make other people feel connected with you. You make other people feel that they can trust you because you're somebody that is trustworthy. And so I think that's really important. Number 8, digital mindedness. And this is, I think, well, we've realized during this MCO, this is the one thing that is keeping, our business, our education, to a lot of extent, even our relationships alive, right? When we are locked down in our house, the technology enables us to be connected to the rest of the world. So I think this is a really good, opportunity to teach our children that the technology, their iPads, their computers, their phones are more than just entertainment, So more than just a tool for entertainment. Sorry, there's a spelling mistake there. It should be more than just a tool, not a tool for entertainment. That our children can use it as a device for learning, education. So that's why now I'm so pleased. I want to again thank all of my teaching staff from Sri KDU and Real Schools and Real Kids for taking the opportunity this 2 weeks to really, use all of the online technology that we've had. I know it's not easy. It's a new thing for a lot of us. Many of us have never done e-education before, but I want to thank you for stepping outside your comfort zone to offer e-education, because that's really powerful in teaching students that their devices are more than just toys to play with, that they can learn, they can create things on their devices, So for the Real Schools, for example, I mean, we just introduced the iPad one-to-one Apple program. I mean, just in time, actually, we just managed to roll it out for our national schools in Jan, just before the CMO, MCO. And so that was fortunate of us. But, I mean, one of the reasons why we chose the iPad devices was because, we felt that those devices are the best for creation. So computers and technology should not just be seen for as by children as consumption devices, meaning they're just seeing and hearing and listening or reading, but it's devices where they can actually create a lot of things, So whether it's movies, create stuff, create, presentations, proposals, ideas, animation. I mean, the things that young kids can do, with an iPad is amazing and way beyond, I think, the thinking of us adults who are a bit more fixed in our thinking. But I mean, they are a lot more fluid and flexible. So I think encouraging our children to let's create things. I mean, with an iPad, you could have your own recording studio. You could write your own songs, you could record music, you could write poetry, you could, almost all of the arts, you could do something. You can even, write a movie and a play and direct something, a short film, film it on your camera. So the idea here is that, we want to show students and children the potential of technology. That's why, I've used the phrase digital mindedness. It's not just a technical skill. And I think this is where a lot of schools and a lot of adults, we sometimes miss the point when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution. Immediately we are thinking about technical skills. Okay, let's do coding, let's do programming, which, by the way, all of our schools also do. But that's not enough. Coding and programming are technical skills. I think that the more important thing is that it's about developing our thinking to understand, grasp, and embrace the potential of the fourth industrial revolution, to understand what quantum computing gives us, what VR, what we can do with VR and AR and AI and nanotechnology and 3D printing, and you name it, 101 things that have become enabled because of this fourth industrial revolution. And it's about getting children to link the tools with the real world. And how do you apply these tools? Technology is just a tool. By itself, it's not going to solve any problem, but how do you link these tools to solving problems in the real world? So recently, for example, in I know real schools, they were doing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, right? SDGs. But what I really liked was a lot of the groups, so all of the students had to develop ideas and solutions to solve, a certain SDG need. And a lot of it were tech solutions, and that to me shows digital mindedness, using technology as a platform to solve a real world problem, right? So in this MCO period, an ideal opportunity for parents to, I think, open your eyes of your children to see the full potential of technology, and let them open your eyes as well. I think in many cases, it's going to be the children leading the parents, so that we the technology. Number 9, right? For those of you who have just joined us, we're going through, these 10 skills and qualities that I think our children need to develop and master to thrive in the VUCA world. VUCA standing for volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And these are things that we can teach during this MCO period. So we're down to our last 2 points before I end. So number 9 is about learning new skills, right? And the idea that, to survive in the VUCA world, our children need to be open and have the courage to try new things, move beyond the comfort zone. Earlier on, I talked about the fact that I'm very inspired, and I thank my teachers in the various schools, because they've had to learn how to use online learning in a new way, and they've had to really, go beyond their comfort zone, and that's this skill, this openness, this courage. So to me, look, MCO lockdown, this is a really good time to learn new things, learn new languages. I have friends of mine who are learning whole new languages, and they're becoming pretty good at it. Every day they are going on YouTube, learning Spanish, learning Japanese, learning Korean, sorry, or taking up new hobbies, learning new skills, So I think it's about parents encouraging children to develop the joy of mastering new things, right? And I think part of this is about generating interest. It's not about parents forcing children to, okay, learn this, Dr. Goh says, learn something new. Okay, so I'm going to force you to learn the guitar, or force you to learn, how to juggle, or force you to learn a new language. It's not about very top down, it's about asking the child with the interest. Asking your children, look, what is one thing now? Papa and mommy, all of this, by example, we are going to be learning new things, just as a fun way to occupy time during this COVID, lockdown period, right? So whether we learn a skill, or a language, all of us are picking something new. So we want everybody in the family, but you get to choose something that you want, right? So it could be a new skill, and this is something that we can share as a family. So, once in every 2-3 days, everybody gets to demonstrate their new skill. And there's affirmation, there's positive reinforcement, there's praise, but it's about starting that cycle of, I'm trying something new, I get a bit better at it, I'm getting praise from my parents and family, and I try again, and it's an achievement cycle. And so this habit of I'm trying new things, I like to learn new skills, and to me this is incredibly important in a VUCA environment, because you can imagine your children when they are in a VUCA environment in their workplace that is going to be always changing because of this fourth industrial revolution. Can you imagine how many new skills they will need to learn every month, every year, just to survive in an ever-changing industry and a technological environment, right? And to me, I think the most important thing that we can teach and we can give to our children during this MCO that prepares them for VUCA world is the power of love, And I've always said, when I've given parenting talks, those of you who have attended my workshops in the past know that I always come back to this point, which is that the foundation, right, of all parenting. So whatever it is you want to do as a parent, whether you're teaching them a new skill or teaching them values or you're trying to communicate with your child or whatever it is you want to do, the foundation point really is the power of love. It's about children knowing that parents unconditionally love them and accept them. And I think in a time where people are nervous, right? So in this COVID crisis, everybody's a bit more stressed. Everybody's a bit more concerned. Everybody is a bit more nervous and afraid because we are hearing about, this crisis and all these horrible things happening around the world, and the count is going up. And naturally, I think both children and parents feel sometimes the stress and worry. And to me, the greatest balm, the greatest antidote, the most powerful thing that combats fear and combats uncertainty is love. So in a VUCA world, this is the source of stability, in my view. That unconditional love, that no matter what happens to me, what challenges I face, I can come back to my family, my home, my parents, because they are the secure base, And I think those of us who have grown up in that environment, it makes a huge difference, to our confidence levels, our mental health, there's so many things that are rooted in this home of unconditional love. So I would say, I want to end with this, but this is actually the most important point. You forget everything else, remember this for parents out there. During this MCO period, this is your opportunity. You will never have so much time to spend this 4 weeks. So take this opportunity, grasp this opportunity, love them, make sure that they know you love them. Express that to them, and different gestures. Some of you may actually say it. Some of you, it's a matter of holding them, hugging them, giving them treats, spending time with them, which I guess is easier now that you're all locked in the same house. But, spending time with them, and enjoying doing things together. I know many families have posted on Facebook all of the fun stuff they're doing together, exercising together, playing board games together, watching movies together, having interests together, cooking together, eating together. So I think that's lovely. That's wonderful. You can't fake that. This is genuine. It's about a family enjoying one another. And when your children look into your eyes, they need to see this genuine sense of joy that, I'm so blessed to have you as our children. I'm so lucky. I'm so fortunate, that you're my child, and that's something that I can be gracious for. I can be grateful for. And so I want to end with that. That it's about love in the end of the day. I know there are a whole bunch of other things that we want to develop and we want to train and we want to grow in our children, but I can tell you, our children are not going to be listening to us unless they know that we are teaching these things out of a place of love. And we're not doing this for any other agenda. We're not doing this because we're trying to show off. We're not doing this because we think parenting is a competitive sport. We're not doing this because we're trying to keep up with other relatives or neighbors or other parents in the school. I'm dead against any kind of competition between parents. Parents, if they want to compete, they should compete against one another, but parents should never use their children to compete against each other. I think as a parent, we need to have a really clear idea of motive. The idea that we are doing everything for our children because we love our children. And there's no other motive. We need to be crystal clear that whatever we teach them, so even when we rebuke them, even when we are disciplining them, it's not because of anything else but out of love, because we want to prepare them to be happy and to live a full life. So I think I want to end with that. Maybe before I head off, just a quick reminder, all right, of the 10 points that we've talked about today. I know it's a bit much, right? Maybe a bit too much of an overload, but these are the 10 qualities that I think we should really be teaching our children now that we are, in the house with them. And these qualities are going to help them long-term thrive in a VUCA world. So adaptability, the internal locus of control, focusing on what they can control rather than complaining and moaning and groaning. Being independent, so learning to take responsibility to do things for themselves. This intellectual curiosity, so learning to think, but also having this love of knowledge. Resilience, so that psychological strength, and learning to tough it out, learning that the world is not easy, that life is not easy, that challenges are going to come. And therefore, they need to deal with disappointment and stress and pressure. Emotional intelligence, so that's EQ, so learning how to manage their emotions better because they're able to identify and understand them. Collaboration, learning to work with one another. And I mentioned, empathetic understanding, so learning to care about the needs of other people rather than being very self-centered. Digital mindedness, so seeing the huge potential in technology, not just as entertainment, but as a means to do great things in the world. Learning new skills, right? So embracing the new, having courage to try things, even if it's not easy and awkward. And then the last but most important thing, learning about the power of love, and remembering that in the end of the day, even in a uncertain world, in a VUCA world that sometimes can be cruel, sometimes can be unfair, can be unforgiving, can be harsh, that there's always a place they can come to where they can find love, and that's the family, and friendship. They can find this safe place where they feel truly accepted, and loved and valued. All right. So I want to stop there. All right, and thank all of you. Like I say, a special shout out to all of the parents from Sri KDU and Rail Kids, Rail Schools, Cambridge English for Life, the many centers out there, to all of my colleagues, some of you who are listening in, to some of my friends, former students. I recognize some of you. I want to thank all of you. It's been a real good time of sharing. All right. And like I say, I'm open to any questions. So I'm very quickly going through the comments list. I'm going to open up maybe for just 5 minutes of questions. If anybody has anything they want to ask, this is a good time. All right. Now, I can't answer everything. So I mean, because of limited time, but if you have any questions, feel free to just type it into our Facebook timeline, and I will see whether I can answer them. All right. Interesting. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So a lot of really good feedback. So all of you should take time to actually read the comments by the other parents and the other educators as well. Really interesting stuff. Right. So I think, look, in terms of what one Kihui has asked, how do we make children to be more focused and disciplined? They seem to be distracted with too much time on phones and TVs. That's true. So I mean, I talked earlier about the potential for technology, and that's really important. But at the same time, we know many of our children are completely addicted to technology, and you need that balance. And that's tougher in an MCO because you can't ask them to, hey, go outside and play football because they can't, all right, unless your house has got a garden. But I think, look, it's always about boundaries. I remember, last year giving a workshop on technology, and I think one of the rules of thumb is that, as a parent, it is your job to set the boundaries, to say, look, if it's 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day, then that's it. Now, of course, during the MCO, we know that everything is online learning, so that's fine. But that's something that Papa and Mommy can monitor, all right, through things like screen time and all of that. But beyond that, we do want you to try different things. So after your online lessons are done, after your technology time is finished, then look, turn it off, and there are other things to do around the house. And again, it's not as though being trapped in the house means that technology is the only source of activity, right? Like I say, we talked about board games, we talk about reading. I'm a fan of reading. I believe, libraries should be palaces where we encourage this love of literature. So I'm sure we've got books in the house. And even if we don't have books, okay, maybe then, we have to download things online. But that tower of shame, we call it, of books that we have bought that we've never read, this is an opportunity to read to your children, read with your children. You want your children to read, then we could have a family reading time at night where everybody then is reading together. So again, they're taking their lead from the adults. So I would say, Kihui, definitely it's about setting limits and saying, okay, it's 1 hour, 2 hours, and after that, look, all of the technology is kept aside. They're turning off the Wi-Fi because now we want to do something else. We want to do some exercise or, have some family time together. So it's important as parents that you do set boundaries and make sure that the kids keep to that. All right. Any other questions? All right, let me just yeah, I mean the video will be safe. I think. I don't think we are erasing the video. So if you've missed the earlier parts, you can play it to your heart's content anytime you want. All right. Yeah, I think we will make the whole session of this video available through Facebook, so that's not a problem. Any other questions? Parenting questions? How do you deal with teenagers who spend too much time? Yeah, same thing. So I think Wong Susan, same issue. Like I say, I understand the pain parents go through and the difficulty sometimes with addressing the balance. And really, it's about then us as adults setting a good example, because the reality is many of us are also stuck to our devices, especially during an MCO period, because we're having to do emails and work, and we are on our handphones, we are on Skype, we are on this and that, WhatsApping. So we also, as adults, we need to, I think, set the example of saying, look, we need to put the devices down sometime and spend time with the family uninterrupted. So I think if we show them that it can be done, and we make this a family policy, then I think that's a lot more powerful than we are telling our kids to put the technology away, but we're actually on the phone sort of 24 hours a day. All right. So I think that's really important. And it's also about giving them alternatives, because if you're telling them, okay, put down the handphone or turn off the iPad, then do what? All right. So it's about helping your children, especially younger children, find alternatives. So what else can they do around the house? And hopefully in your house, there are other things to do. So whether it's board games, whether it's games, whether it's things you can do as a family. Look, there are all these really great videos of families, creating things like mini Olympics and, fun activities to do from nothing, right? Just using household appliances and empty boxes and stuff like that. So I would say if you're resourceful and creative, you could create almost any kind of a playground or activity that is fun to do for children and for adults alike. And so if you provide them an alternative to the technology, then at least you're giving them something else to focus on and something else that can be fun, right? So again, I'm just scrolling down to see whether there are any other questions. All right. Current school system caters to memorizing. World is moving to. Yeah, so thank you, Tina Karan, for asking that question. That's why I think I'm not saying don't memorize, because if you go back to that slide, which I'm going to, if you go back to that slide, just give me a second. On Bloom's taxonomy, all right. Just give me a minute. I'm going to go back to that now. All right, just give me a second. All right, so if you go back to my slides earlier when I was talking about Bloom's, you have to understand that all of these need to work together. So I'm not saying that, cup to the compass means that we only focus on the top 3 levels: creativity, evaluation, and analysis. And hey, forget about remembering and understanding, because the purpose of the pyramid is you can't build the top levels of the pyramid without the bottom levels. But I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. I'm not throwing out memory completely. I mean, ironically, my PhD in psychology was on memory. So I've nothing but good things to say about memory. I think, so it's about building. So of course, kids need to learn to remember and juggle information, particularly in their working memory, and they need to understand in order for them to apply. So if they are not doing the bottom 2 levels of memory and understanding, they can't apply, analyze, evaluate, create. But I think it's about, to me, the emphasis, right? And the problem is, if, for example, 80-90% is on the first level of memory. Now that to me is not balanced. That's ridiculous. So for example, when I was in university, most of my exams, and my students will know this, most of my exams were actually open book exams. Right? Because, by the way, open book exams were a lot more difficult than closed book exams, because my demands on an open book exam is on the top end of that pyramid. So the exam questions are meant to test application, analysis, evaluation, and creativity. And I guess, so I'm not anti-memory work, and I'm not, saying that we should, disband that completely, because you're right. Many of you are living in the real world where, unfortunately, your schools still focus on a lot of memory work, and you're preparing kids. Schools also, I don't want to blame them, because they are preparing them for exams, national exams all over the world, and not just in Malaysia, but all over the world. They're preparing them for exams that largely focus on number 1 and number 2 in that pyramid. So I think, slowly, I know the whole world is slowly trying to explore different forms of assessment, and it's true here in Malaysia as well, to move up that pyramid. And look, I mean, in the past, the thinking used to be, okay, when young kids are in school, just focus on remembering and understanding. Maybe when they are in university, we go up to application, analysis, and the rest. And I think that's a terrible approach to take. Why? Because, I mean, I was lecturing in university for 20 years. And I can tell you that it's too late now, but by the time they're 19, 20, if students have no exposure and no ability to do that top level thinking, it's incredibly difficult for the university in 3-4 years to suddenly, from nothing, develop that thinking order. So that's why in schools all over the world now, including I know in Sri KDU and Rio, that's the debate we're having now. How do we do more of this? How do we push this so that, our kids, even at a young age, 10, 11, 12, are already doing some application and analysis, which, by the way, I can tell you as a cognitive psychologist, certainly they can do. So anybody who says, no, they're too young to do it, they don't have the brain power to do it, it's nonsense, right? I mean, everything about cognitive science tells us that, kids' brains are incredibly powerful. It's just that often we underestimate that, And so I think, again, going back to Tina's question, it's not about doing away with memory work and understanding. Like you say, it's about having that balance, So I'm thinking that as a teacher in the school, I'm able to do both. So of course, I need to teach my children to memorize some stuff. Why? Because the reality is they're going to need to sit for public exams like PT3 and SPM, that if they have no memory at all, they're not going to pass those exams. And same thing for IGCSE and A-level. So that's the reality. These are not open book exams. All right. So because of that, therefore, the reality is we need to imbue them with some skills to memorize. So that's the first level. But as a teacher, then I shouldn't need to be confined to that. So I should still take time in my lessons, my assessment, my assignments, my projects that I give my students to push them up, all right, up that pyramid to the other levels, so that they are also exposed to the upper levels on a regular basis, right? So I think it's about taking, like I say, a balanced approach, to education. Okay, good. Let me see whether there are any other questions. Is it a good idea? So Lai has written in to enroll kids to too many enrichment classes, ballet, to the extent the kids feel exhausted. Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. I think your statement, in a sense, is the answer, which is, yeah, of course. I mean, a balance is needed. Too many things, clutter to the point where the kids have no life and no space. So nothing wrong with, I think, ensuring your kids have a holistic education and upbringing. And I certainly appreciate and understand that, I mean, not all parents enroll their children in schools where they have that breadth and that holistic manner. I mean, that's something I think we are trying to do certainly in our schools, in Sri KDU and Real, where we are trying to make our schools one-stop centers. You're in that school, and then everything is there. The sports, the music, the enrichment, the languages, the drama, performing arts, technology, so that we're trying to cut down the parents' time so that they don't need to ferry kids from one center to the next center to the next center to the next center, and it's very difficult. But I appreciate the fact that not all schools can provide that, so there's going to be a lot of parents that will supplement, isn't it, the school program with an enrichment program, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's some excellent enrichment centers that are out there, all right? Of course, one of our members of the group, Cambridge English for Life, is a really good case in point. They are the largest, strongest English program in Malaysia. But I think it's about balance, so you can't do 3, 4, 5 hours of this every day. I mean, your kid will die, let alone the parents having to ferry them, being caught in traffic jams for 2, 3 hours every day. So it's about a balance. And I want to say, I mean, being in education for 25 years, and I think I've seen and been exposed enough to both education, but also, I used to do a lot of corporate, consulting and training, particularly with human resource departments, because, our background is psychology. So a lot of time, I've spent looking at talent management programs and looking at what companies look for in the qualities of children, qualities of graduates, to hire. And I can say, look, in many cases, parents, I think, are overdoing this whole enrichment thing. It's become crazy, and like I said earlier, I think in many cases, it's become parents being very scared because they see all of these new things. And, the neighbor is doing this, and my relative is doing this, and these other people are doing this, and, and of course, these are the discussions in the school courtyard, right? After we drop off our kids and all the parents come together and we're all discussing this on WhatsApp groups and all that, and everybody's talking about, wow, there's this program, that program, and hundreds of programs. And to the point where then I'm so scared that my child is going to be left out of something, that therefore I feel obliged to enroll my poor kid in like 50 different enrichment programs. So I think that's overdoing it. So I think there needs to be a balance, So it's good to, I think, as a parent, try to look beyond what the school is offering and say, what else can I do to supplement my child's experience? But look, I want to say, I mean, employers of the future are not going to go through your child's CV, when they are 24, 23, 24 as a university graduate, and ask themselves, okay, look, how many 100 enrichment programs, and because you don't have this and this and this and this, therefore, I'm not going to hire you. I mean, that's ridiculous. In the end of the day, I can tell you, it's about, I think, focusing on things that your child enjoys doing, focusing on the fundamental skills that are important. And anything beyond that is icing on the cake. So if you've got the time, you've got the money, then that's great. But you shouldn't feel pressured, right? And I think that's what I'm noticing when I talk to parents. It's almost out of fear that they are doing this. I'm so afraid my child is going to be left behind that I've got to enroll them in 101 things. So I think we need to be careful about that. I've always believed in protecting the childhood for our children. I mean, they've got a childhood, and childhood means that they need some free time of their own. In fact, to me, having that free time every day for your young children as well as your teenagers is incredibly important. Having what we call, the name escapes me now, but free time where they have the freedom to choose what they want to do out of their own initiative. So whether they want to, do something, read something, do an activity, create something on their iPad, draw something, write something, talk with friends, I mean, this discretionary time, right? This time where they have some freedom to make decisions about their interests. this is incredibly important for their psychological health. So if the poor children, and you see this in some countries, right? I mean, we've heard horror stories in some parts of the world, some parts of Asia, where you've got kids, they wake up at 5, they rush to school, they are at school until 3, 4 p.m. They've got a 1-hour break, then it's 5 hours of tuition, enrichment courses, homework, all the way until 10 p.m. Then they go to sleep, and then, fresh reset, start all over again. And every day is like that. So no discretionary time. They've got no free time to actually explore life by themselves. Now, to me, I mean, I've got a feeling that those kind of graduates are going to be a lot less interesting when I see them in a job interview in 20 years' time, compared to a graduate that, is got their own space, they are independent, they are able to, like I say, develop and make decisions of their own, rather than they followed, their parents' whole schedule for development over 12 years and just gone from one thing to the next. So they may have a whole bunch of skills, but no independent thinking or no independent thought or character, So yeah, you're right, Vinita. It's unstructured time. I mean, but it's also what I call discretionary time. Discretionary time meaning it's the child's discretion what they want to do. It's a fancy word for free time. All right. So I think as parents, I've got 2 children now. I mean, my daughter is 18. My son is 10, turning 11. This is something that I have, been quite, I think, strict and strong about, which is ensuring that each of them at every stage of their upbringing has had a good balance of free time every day. And I'm thinking, at least 15 to 20% of their day, they should have that discretionary time. So it's not just, one activity after another, and particularly for weekends as well. It's about keeping time free so that they have the space to then try different things, space to explore, space to be by themselves, space to just relax for a while, space to breathe, right? And by the way, for adults, this is also important. So if you as an adult, your schedule is also like that, from the time you wake up to the time you sleep, there's no discretionary time. You have nothing, no choice at all. Your whole day is have to do, have to wake up, have to take the kids to school, have to go to work, have to come back, have to, start cooking, have to do this, which I think a lot of mothers will allude to, because maybe us fathers are not pulling our weight enough. But the idea here is that if that's the case, then that's unhealthy as well. So then we need to readdress that balance, all right, so that we also have some space to breathe. Because without that space to breathe, we are not growing as adults. You understand? So I think that's really important. All right. Look, I want to thank everybody. The questions are coming hard and fast now. I'm trying to see whether there are questions in other areas. I mean, tech I've talked about already. Reading, yeah, reading is great. I mean, that's the one thing our family does the most. Just take every month, take your kids to the bookshop. Kinokuniya is sort of our heaven. Go in there, go to Kinokuniya, just everybody takes 1 hour, everybody buys 1 or 2 books, for the month or for the week. I think that's wonderful. And getting kids to choose their own books, and read, that's really so important. The reading habit in my mind often translates to that intellectual curiosity that I talked about earlier. Right? Okay. Yeah, I think Noor Azi asked a very interesting question. What happens when parents ourselves have difficulties to cope with changes? Exactly. And look, none of us are perfect. Noor Azi, I mean, I just want to say I'm not perfect. I think the analogy here is all of us are struggling. During this MCO or COVID crisis or VUCA world, the parents are struggling to deal with changes, the children are struggling to deal with changes. And I'm not for any minute suggesting that we teach our children only once we've figured out everything ourselves. That what qualifies us as a parent is when we are perfect, when we've got everything under control and we've got all the answers. I mean, look, if that's the case, none of us will be qualified as parents. I can guarantee you that. So I think the idea here is that we are, it's okay, I think, for your children to see how we are struggling, to see how we are trying to problem solve, to see how we are trying to identify solutions. But it's all right for them to see that we are also frail. It's okay to, I think, for our kids to see our frailty, the fact that we don't always have the answers, that sometimes we do get stressed, that we do make mistakes, we do have to say sorry, right? So I don't think that's going to be a problem. In fact, by seeing that, it gives them a much more realistic view of what being an adult is. And they don't put us on a pedestal that is so unrealistic, so that next time when they become parents, they also freak out because they think they have to be perfect. So I think number one is embracing the fact that we don't always know what we what to do, but of course we are a bit more experienced. We've probably got a few more ideas about how to solve problems, and so we are sharing that expertise. So it's sharing from the position of experience rather than from perfection, right? And it's okay. I mean, it's okay for children to sometimes see us freak out a little bit, and and sort of get upset and get unnerved, and then our kids can see how we actually manage that stress and that uncertainty. All right. So look, I want to thank all of you for joining in. All right. I'm sorry that I've not been able to answer all the questions. I mean, we are sort of already 50 minutes over schedule. So I thank the 200 very patient parents who are still sticking with me. This has been about a 2-hour session now. But thank you so much, everybody. And so what I'll do is I will, in a minute, I'm going to share my notes, and all of you can then, download this at your leisure. But also what I will do then is in my notes, I will put my email address. So if any of you have further questions, all right, and I've not had time to actually answer these questions, then feel free to email me, and I'm happy to take it up another time, all right? So look, thank you so much, everyone. Please, this period, I want to end by reminding all of you to stay safe, all right? Focus on the health of yourself and your children. Make sure you look after yourself, because of course, I mean, if you can't, if you're not healthy, you can't look after your family members. So please make sure you're looking after yourself physically, psychologically, socially. And, I want to wish you all the best. God bless all of you during this challenging time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much.